Welcome to the Embodiment podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with embodiment specialists from around the world. I'm your host, Mark Walsh. So on the show today, Amanda Brown. So Amanda, I've known for a few years for the Embodied Facilitator course. She has about 30 plus years experience in various embodied disciplines, particularly yoga. She's experienced in various kinds of yoga teachers, body work as well. So she's trained in massage, aromatherapy, relaxology, and cranio-sacral particularly. So we'll probably talk about that. And she also, as she says, makes things. She's a creative as well. So fair few strings to the bow. I think Amanda's like many of the teachers I know in the UK who are kind of incredibly experienced, but maybe a little unsung because they don't put themselves out there in quite the same way as some of the Americans. So I'm happy to give you a stage today, Amanda. Welcome.
Hi.
Hello.
Nice to be here. Hi.
What was your story with the body? How did you get interested in it?
So I've been thinking about this, obviously, and I think I was a very physical child. Both of my parents were rock climbers and mountaineers, so I was brought up kind of camping and going up cliffs from being very little. And so I think that was just a natural part of my life, and I was given a lot of freedom that way as well. And then, so I'll fast forward a little bit. When I was 13, due to various circumstances, we ended up living up north, which is where my parents come from. And I was deeply unhappy there and had a bit of a breakdown and came back down to Cornwall to live with my father at that point and started on some kind of journey. It's like I'd done my bad stuff by the time I was 13 and a half and witnessed some stuff that I'd rather not have witnessed. And I started to inquire then into how I could change things, how things could be different. So actually it probably started then with meditation. And my dad took me off to do a TM course, a transcendental meditation course, with somebody that he knew because he wanted to try it. And he hated it and I loved it. And so that was my first experience. And I think that I began to sort my head out a little tiny bit then.
Okay, so let me place the geography a little bit for our international listeners. So you're up north, that's kind of like...
near Manchester.
Yeah, if you imagine,
not north.
Imagine Mordor from Lord of the Rings, everyone. That's what the north's like. Or the north in Game of Thrones is based loosely on the north of England. So yes, there's that. And in Cornwall, where you are now, is the little bit that sticks out at the bottom left of the UK. Can you say a little bit about what Cornwall's like? Because you're sort of 8 hours on the train from London, which is as far away as Scotland, actually, from London.
Yes, it takes about 5 hours on the train actually from London to London from here. So Cornwall's a peninsula, and because of that, it's always been fairly insular and isolated. And actually, the Romans never came as far as Cornwall. They stopped at Plymouth, which I always like. So Cornwall often thinks of itself as a separate little country. It's got a little flag, hasn't it? And people kind of have a Cornish kind of look because there's quite a lot of sort of Celtic genes there. Yes, definitely. And I was brought up here. I did actually move away for quite a long time. I've lived in various different places, but most of us end up sort of trundling back at some point. I think because just to find community here, and it's very beautiful.
Tourists come there as well, don't they?
Yeah, they do.
Coastlines from the smugglers and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It strikes me in the UK, there's these little islands in the UK that are sort of cut off that can have some very high quality kind of people doing, like yourself with 30 years experience of work, but they might not be necessarily sort of out there on the internet in a big way or kind of well known. It's the sort of unsung heroes of yoga and meditation and things like that in these little corners of the UK.
Well, I think, and I have quite so people that I consider to be my peers, are in pockets around the country who've been teaching for about the same length of time, and we all get together every now and again. And some of them are kind of teaching in a much wider way, but I think one of the reasons that I've stayed down here is that I've had some students now for about 25 years, and there's something that's really special about that for me. to actually carry through with somebody as they change and as I change, and for us to be together. For me, that's what yoga community is about, not so much a kind of sudden coming together. And I've done a bit of that as well with running yoga festivals and things where everybody suddenly comes together and you make instant community. But there's something, I think I'm quite a slow processor. So quick mind, but slow processor for things to percolate through. And I get that from teaching in community. So it's not as sexy as I do a little bit of traveling around the country now, actually, but generally I really value, I'm in Flushing Village Hall this morning with a group of really quite strong practitioners. And then this afternoon I'm teaching one of my yoga women class where I'm working with ladies in their late 60s to early 70s, and we're doing something very different. And tomorrow I'll be working with different groups again. So I work with a very wide range, the whole spectrum, if you like, in community. And I really value that because I think I'm a responder quite often. I love to respond to what's happening in front of me. And being constantly in community like that, I can respond to the changes in others. And I think it gives me, it brings depth and interest to my own teaching for myself.
Yeah, because I mean, if you're just doing a cookie cutter thing, that's one level of complexity. But as soon as something's relational, then you've got another level of complexity and interest, I would say.
Yeah, and I think when there's that kind of level of trust there, people will, and this is one of the dangerous edges actually in yoga, which is very current at the moment. But when there's that level of trust there and a sense of safety, then people will definitely be able to explore things that they wouldn't necessarily have explored otherwise.
And actually, it might sound crazy to you, but people have become thinking of yoga now in terms of the yoga rock stars and the celebrities and the fancy studios in the big cities. But still, in the UK, the majority of people, I would say, who are doing yoga are just quietly, as you said, in a church hall or a village centre. And they might have had an Iyengar training 20 or 30 years ago and have a group that they know really, really well inside out. And you will see that in cities. Like if you go to Pete Blackaby's class we had on the show in Brighton, you go to he's had regulars for 20 years. But you definitely see it out. And that's in Brighton, which has quite a strong kind of tick through of people. But even if the studio is sort of on the outside of town, it's not like the main one in the centre. Where there's much higher turnover, where people go to this teacher for maybe a few weeks or maybe a year, then someone else. And I just want to kind of credit this kind of, well, it's still a large group of people who don't wear the yoga leggings, just kind of quietly getting on with it in church halls across the country.
Yeah, well, there's that, and I do both. So I teach in a sort of really nice studio as well in Falmouth, which was opened up a few years ago by somebody who's much more kind of out there, and so I teach there as well. But I mainly do the classes that are more specialised there. But I teach a train there.
Do you have leggings there, Amanda? That's the key thing.
Do I never wear leggings with unicorns on them, if that's what you're asking.
It would be good to know. Unicorns are big now, though. Unicorns are everywhere. They're really taken off.
Exactly, which is why I wouldn't be wearing them.
They're too cool. You're past that. So let's come back to this community aspect. I think this is really interesting, that a lot of embodied practice is presented from a sort of hyper-individualistic kind of, late-stage capitalist American influence model of the lone practitioner, and you go off retreats on your own, or you do your yoga on your own, or, whatever the thing is. And it's always struck me that the community piece is a kind of missing piece there. So can you say a little bit more about doing yoga in community with people that you've known for years?
Well, I think it's sort of, my classes are not terribly big. A couple of them are, and sometimes they get big. But generally speaking, there are between 10 and 20 people in a class. 20 is exceptional. And I think that allows for, really, the thing that I feel like I'm working with most at the moment is how do we allow people to feel safe so that they can play their edge. So it's not that I particularly want to play it safe. I want people to feel safe enough that they can really go deeper in exploring what's going on for them. And there's something about being witness. So it's not that we use witnessing as a particular technique in my classes, but being around people and doing things relationally just by having other presence in the room that you're aware of, that you know a little bit more, I think allows us to go a little bit further, or to open more into our experience than we might otherwise.
Yeah, I think kind of a sense of safety and belonging are really necessary conditions for deep work. Like, until people have that sense of like, hey, you know, I'm in a relatively supportive group of people here, and I'm known, and I'm seen. But until that's in place, I think it's very difficult for people to find this kind of strength and courage to open up to the kind of deeper levels.
Yeah, and sometimes that's implicit. You know, if you're all doing a strong practice all together, then actually that can be implicit in the practice, but not always.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. It doesn't have to be necessarily sort of eye-gazing or verbal debriefs. There's just a sense of that we're all in here together and we all know each other.
Yes. I mean, really, I think, so I'll use, one of the things I think that characterises my teaching is that I'm a tart, in that I'll use anything that I can if I think
for our international, it is exactly what a tart is, my dear.
Pardon?
What's a tart in American?
So I will take anything that I think might be of use to me and use it.
So you're not a purist, or a lineage purist?
No. Well, I thought that this might come up, actually. And one of the things that's interesting me, that I was thinking about, is that actually I'm part of a Buddhist tradition. So this informs my teaching. It's a view. I don't teach Buddhism, but I would say it's inevitable that it informs my view. That I'm part of a Buddhist tradition which has a strong tradition of lineage. But I was part of an Iyengar tradition which also has a fair amount of lineage attached to it. But I felt a very strong need to step out of that because it wasn't working for me at all. And there's a number of reasons for that. But it's to do with how the lineage is held and how much freedom you have within that I think makes a difference. So, for instance, as an Iyengar teacher, you're not really meant to question what happens. And you're also not meant to, this might have changed. I've not been an Iyengar teacher for about 8 or 9 years now. I resigned. You're not allowed to practice any other form of yoga.
You're not allowed to practice any form of yoga?
That used to be if you were a teacher. If you were a teacher, not a practitioner.
Wow. Okay.
I could be. There'll be Iyengar teachers all over the world saying it's not so, it's not so. But that was my understanding of it when I was a teacher, because it dilutes the method. And so eventually for me, I was just doing so much other stuff. I'm really interested in Feldenkrais continuum movement, 5 rhythms, any form of movement. As I said, I'll try it and see how it fits with or allows people to understand. Pardon?
You're a somatically loose woman.
Yes. Yeah. So eventually I felt I had to leave anyway, because if that was the case, then I wasn't sticking to the rules.
Yeah, for sure. And what do you think of this term from Theodore Wildcraft of post-lineage yoga that says we're in a post-lineage yoga kind of world now? Have you come across that one?
Oh, definitely. Yes. Yeah. I know Theodora and I follow her work closely because I think she writes really intelligently.
She does, yes.
And interestingly, and Matthew Remsky and Carol Horton, I definitely follow all of those threads because I'm interested in it. Post-lineage, I think, is interesting. I think one of the things that's happened is that obviously when yoga hit the West, the Eastern teachers didn't quite know what they were working with when they came here, and neither did the Western people quite have the fundamental understanding of what underpinned Eastern teachings. So I think what's happened is that there's been a loss of real lineage. So we're post-lineage partly because we've rejected it because of all the terrible scandals that have mainly happened in the West. So I know about the stuff with Patabi Josh that's happened, which wasn't in the West, but was with Western students. So I think it kind of all arises. I think that lineage stuff can work, and I thought that this might come up. And I was actually with my Buddhist teachers this weekend, and I asked him what would be a good answer for this, and he said the thing is that without lineage, the teachings are all about the teacher.
Yeah, comes ego, comes personality.
Yeah, and that this would be, and that with the lineage, it's not about the teacher at all. It's about the teachings.
Yeah.
And he acknowledges that things go wrong. You know, there are scandals in Buddhist world, just as there are in...
Are there other ways around that other than just to challenge that a little bit, Amanda? Like you can, for example, like on EFC, we always from the start had two kind of core teachers. So it wasn't about a single personality. We had a bit of a milestone on EFC recently where there was the first module that was where I wasn't teaching on in Russia happened.
Yes.
And by all accounts happened perfectly well without me, which was nice. I was very happy about that. And
For sure there is. Yeah.
Not so much about a lineage, but there's the body of work is put before the personalities. And there's also sort of structures in place, which means that in this case, the personality being me, but you know, there's other personalities I think would be just as flawed. The structures in place, and rather than necessarily like a long tradition that goes back, you know, however many 100 years.
No, but the other thing that I see that you do is that you always are respectful to the people that you've learned from. Yeah. So I see you with Paul Linden, and you have the relationship of a student to a master. That's,
you know, they're surprised when they see how I am with Paul. They're like, I had no idea you could be so respectful. And I'm
yes, like, you know, and I saw that, and I, you know, that probably, you know, informed, made a difference about what I think about how we might argue about stuff generally.
Yeah, it's important. So there's always a sort of nodding back to the past and, you know, heritage, even if it's not. I mean, Paul Linden, I could actually directly say I'm a lineage holder as such. You know, he's asked me to look after his stuff. Yeah. But it's most of my teachers wouldn't go in that category, but there's at least a sort of acknowledgement that, you know, on the handouts it says, doesn't it, you know, based on the work of, and it'll be...
It does. Yeah, you always do that, and I think that's important, because I think when that doesn't happen, something else that happens is that people start cherry picking.
Yeah. What's the difference between being, you know, because this is the dark side of being a yogatar, isn't it? Is this is a potential for cherry picking. So instead of just taking the best and assimilating and integrating, it's just little bits of incomplete knowledge sort of crowbarred together.
Yes, but I think I did 20 years as an Iyengar teacher. So I feel like I have a very strong framework, and where I can, I go and study with the best.
Yeah. I mean, do you think you need to go into one thing very deeply? Because I'm these days I do all kinds of classes. I'm doing an animal flow class today. You know, I'm doing a comedy improv workshop at the weekend. I'm doing an Aikido class in a couple of days, you know. But I had that like strong, in-depth training in one art, which in my case was Aikido, in your case was Iyengar.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if we need to sort of do kind of pay our dues, like in one art at least in some depth before we can... you know, it's like we need to establish that almost monogamous relationship with an art.
Yes, I do think that, and I have tried to do that in all of the things that I've done, actually, to try and get a long-term relationship with what I do. But there comes a point, I think, where there's a depth of framework. Or the warp. The warp is so embedded, if you like, that you can weave other threads into it without them becoming distorted. Because one of the things that you talked about, and which I talk about to my teacher trainees, is to some extent it doesn't matter what you teach as long as you know what you're teaching, as long as you know why you're teaching it and what the result is going to be.
Uh-huh.
And that's very similar to the kind of Buddhist paths. They're all methods. And you have a base, and then you have a path, and there's going to be a result. at the end of it. And so as long as you know what that is, it doesn't matter. But it takes a long time, I think, to get to that point where you're able to be discerning or to understand that.
For me, the big challenge, and my life's work, is the integration rather than the just putting together randomly. Is like actually being able to sort of say, well, this is what this is good for in this circumstance, and this is how these things fit together or different. It's not just a pluralism of saying, well, it's all good. There's actually saying, well, this is kind of true in this way, but not in this way, or this is good for that, but not this. It's actually, for me, some of it's about discernment and integration is some of the stuff that comes with time.
Yes. And I think that's ongoing. For me, I'm in a process always of becoming something. And I don't know what that is. I mean, at this point in time, I'm not sure what I'm becoming, actually. I feel like there's a lot of knowledge that I'm studying, and it kind of swirls around, actually. And then I think, and then when I walk into the classroom, obviously I've done some planning about what I'm going to teach on, but it's very much then a process of who's in front of me and what arises during the class, because the students, of course, are as important as what's being taught. It's always a response to that. And the integration somehow starts with that, as you have these different individuals in the class and the teaching comes out in whatever way. You notice that a particular individual doesn't maybe get what you're saying. And then the thing that you've just learned makes sense, and you can bring it for this person.
It strikes me there's two ways of kind of really approaching what you just said. Like, one is the long-term relationship, where you're really getting to know the individuals well and how to approach things to them and what makes them tick and how they're different on different days, and being present to that in the present moment. And I guess another way that I've worked with quite a lot is just working with very diverse groups and going, okay, there's no way I can teach embodiment the same in a corporation as I can in the military as I can at a festival or whatever, just to give
definitely.
It's like they're so different that it's just very obvious that I need to present what I'm doing differently. And as a result, you need to understand it at a deeper level so you can be more flexible with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've worked with a really, really wide range of people. And I think actually that's, we were talking about having done lots of different types of yoga and different things now. They've all grown out of a need for me to develop in some way to be able to meet my students where they are. And also, as I've noticed changes in myself, I've realised, and certainly I was a hard ass when I was first teaching. I taught really hard because it wasn't a problem for me. I could do it all. And then when I actually lost my first child quite late, and that totally changed my perspective on what people might be carrying into class with them.
Yeah.
And it shifted again when I actually had my child, and it shifted again when my father became ill, and it shifted again as I started to become perimenopausal. It shifts again as I'm pretty much in menopause now. And each of the things that I've learned have been in response to things that I've encountered, actually.
Yeah. And there's life events, aren't there? Like, I lost a parent a year ago, or, until you've had those experiences stay with one. I know for me, some of the major life experiences I've had, like, I don't know, being in war zones or suicides of friends or things like that, have all had that impact on me. And it's kind of opened up a sense of compassion and how I teach and the width of who I can teach with each one of those.
Yes.
I mean, there's a major one I haven't had yet that I'd love to hear you talk about a little bit, which is parenting, actually. And remember once we sat down and we had a conversation about, like a lot of famous yoga teachers not being parents, I think is something you pointed out to me. And then some of the sort of tensions in being a family person and a yoga teacher.
Yes. Well, I cut down there were 2 or 3 different challenges for me. I got very sick when I was pregnant. And just before I got pregnant, it took me quite a long time to get pregnant the second time. And I was kind of at the top of my game. I was kind of doing my intermediate stuff with Iyengar and thinking, it's fine, I won't have kids. I'm just going to, I'll go for it. and make this my a strong path for myself. And then I got pregnant and had to stop because I was poorly and had a difficult birth, and my son was quite poorly when he was born. And then the physical practice has to change. But yoga, of course, isn't just a physical practice. And I started responding, working much more with, well, still just being in the moment with whatever was going on and responding to that. So it pushed me in a very different direction, and I found it very difficult because I was definitely, I didn't feel so great when I stopped doing a very strong practice. I was doing 4 or 5 hours practice a day for years. So I didn't feel so good when I had to stop that. And then you don't have time when you've got a child to do that. So the practice has to change, and I started focusing much more on meditation practice again, and pranayama practice, and more of the restorative stuff, because that's all I could do. And also probably my falling out with Iyengar yoga began to happen at that time, not because that stuff's not available in Iyengar yoga. Iyengar yoga's got a huge depth of different practices, but the teachers that I were with at the time were not able to assist me with that, if you like. I didn't find them compassionate to my situation, and found out that I wasn't aspiring to be that anymore. What use is a physical practice if it doesn't make you kind?
Yeah. Yeah, for me, I see parallels in other arts where you go from, martial arts, it might have been for me trying to throw everyone around and be super strong and super badass. And at some point it's like, okay, A, how badass do I need to be, like, just for life? And, what's my priority here? Like, is this actually making me a better person, or is this making me sober, or is this making me kinder or a better husband, or whatever it is? And
exactly.
It becomes a very obvious priority. It's like, who really needs to get their foot behind their head or do the perfect triangle? I mean, it's pretty fucking weird if that is your priority.
Yeah, well, and I loved that when I was younger. It was great. I loved it. So I'm not, and I will still teach people if that's what they want to teach, because I remember that's joy. Joy in these strong physical practices. Yeah. So all of the stuff that comes up about kind of strong adjustments and things like that, I wasn't particularly traumatized as a child. I just love the feel of my body doing strong things. And I still like to do that a lot.
I think you're talking about life stages, like when you were young, you talked about menopause there. And it's like, I really feel strongly that older people shouldn't tell young people to do old people practice. It's like, and I'm not saying every young person should do super athletic, strong practice. If they want to do slow, gentle yoga, good for them, let them. But it seems to be that there is a wide tendency that kind of younger people need something athletic to push their bodies, to feel their muscles, even to do handstands, show off and do silly things. Great, good for them. And I think there's something about coming to a kind of older practice, a more mature practice, without looking down on that. Do you know what I mean? Without sort of going, oh, those kids, they shouldn't be doing handstands, and they
definitely. If they want to so I think what really helped me with this, actually, because it's easy to get sort of really judgmental about. It's challenging as a teacher there were 2 teachers, me and somebody else in Falmouth 25 years ago, and now there are like probably 100.
Wow.
And that affects my business. It's hard, it's tough, but it's a lesson, but when the new studio opened up here, I went and did the vinyasa course, and the teacher that teaches there, Karen, she trained in New York in my kind of wilderness years, if you like, when I was really focusing on raising a child and paying my mortgage. And she trained with Jiva Mukti and with Lotus Flow, which is a kind of, you'll know more about that in America probably. And it was really funky and fun, and I totally get why everybody loves it. Because, I mean, I don't ever play with music, and they use soundtracks, but I really enjoyed it, actually. It was
I drink. About once every couple of weeks, I go to a vinyasa class and really enjoy it. It's a total break from the sort of normal, slow, scaravelli stuff that I do, and the yin that I do.
And I don't see that any of it is bad, and people so often as people get older, they can get really sniffy about new age stuff and crystals. But I went through in my early 20s, I went through a crystal healing phase. I loved crystals for a while. And they're things that one passes through and takes through. And so I'm actually really very open to things that people might want to be doing or trying. And I see the young teachers, some of them are really young, coming to do the teacher training and the yoga. And older teachers are often very dismissive of that, like it's rubbish, they're only doing 200 hours and whatever. But actually what happens is that they have a really quite often profound experience during this course goes over a year. And afterwards, they begin to realise the stuff that they don't know.
Yeah.
Just like with any course. And so they go and find, and a good half of the teacher trainees don't teach afterwards anyway. And those that do want to teach quickly find when they're in front of a class that they want to do more training, and off they go and do it. So
learning's a natural urge, isn't it? When you start teaching, they go, hang on a minute, it's more I could learn. And for me, it's always just that. Oh, I'd really love to learn that. I'd love to learn that. It becomes just a matter of time and money that stops.
Well, exactly, yeah. And I'm still in that place. I'm in my 50s now, and there's so many courses that I'd like to go and do. Yeah.
I'm booking into some for next year right now, and it's always nice when people like you or Jude or like the senior EYP teachers are on EFC or you're coming to EYP training, and I'm humbled because I'm like, well, I've only been dabbling yoga for 20 years, and you've been doing it longer than me, and much more intensely in that time. And it's always lovely when people are coming. Actually, I find the most open teachers are either the new ones or the really experienced ones. There's a middle ground that can get a bit know-it-all, but it's people that new or old that are fine.
Well, I think what I find in talking to other friends who are the same age, who've been in it for about the same amount of time, is that you mainly realise what you don't know.
Yeah, it's a cliche.
So, because to some extent there's a lot of knowledge there, but there's so much that you can't kind of keep tabs on it. It arises when it's needed. And then, for the rest of it, what you can see is what you don't know.
Yeah, this embodiment podcast is a fucking nightmare for this, Amanda, because every guest I have on, I think, I should go on their training course. It's real. I've got, I'm interviewing Christopher Wallace later, right? And it's like that man knows so much. And I just interviewed Heather Mason this morning, and she knows like a completely different set of knowledge to Christopher. Like, he's deep in the esoteric stuff. She's in the scientific research. And these are still in the yoga world, which is just one of the parts of embodiment.
Exactly.
By the time I've spoken to all three of you today, I'll be signed up for another 10 training courses. And I'm not.
Yeah.
There's only so much thing. Let's talk a bit about the bodywork stuff, because we talked a lot about yoga, and the other real big side of what you do is the bodywork. So can you say just briefly, like, your kind of background in that?
Yeah, I suppose I got into therapy work more because when I was 19, I did quite a lot of contemporary dance up to about the age of 19, and then I went to art college. And when I was at art college, somebody gave me some work. They went off to do training, and I started teaching movement classes, taking over her classes to children in special schools. And that's actually probably how I started my teaching practice.
Just for the listeners in other countries, special schools is children with mental and physical disabilities?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And they might not even be called that anymore.
Probably upsetting someone, Amanda.
Probably, and I apologise for that. I'm just about to go full circle with that, because I'm about to go to Manchester and teach anatomy on a training course for teachers to learn how to work in that environment. So I've come right the way around with that now. So I started with that, and that got me interested in how bodies work and how different bodies work. And I thought it would be really great, if some of these people could have massage. And then I put that on hold, and I went off to art college where I studied sculpture. This is a roundabout way I'm getting to it, but I think this really informs it. Mm-hmm. And I studied sculpture, installation, and performance work. And there's a lot of embodiment in performance art, actually. I think they were people that really look at what it is to be in the body and to experience yourself as a body. And so that was a starting point. But I also did a lot of anatomical drawing. We had a reciprocal arrangement with the medical school opposite the art college, and I had my own head in there and my own half leg that the mortician gave me, and I used to go and draw in there every week. So I was very fascinated about the body from the inside. Mm-hmm. So at the time I was doing it because I was really interested in ideas around sex and death and that thing when you're kind of so into the body of the other that you think that you can feel the same as them. You think that you're inside their skin or under the bone. And so I was doing drawings around this and wondering what it would be like to be in another body and seeing how close you could get to that, actually.
Yeah.
So that was looking at it from an art perspective. And then I went off to Australia. Actually, when I left art college, I was totally fed up with the whole scene, and I just went away, ran away, really, shaved my head, ran away. And while I was there, the seeds pretty much were planted of almost everything that I do now. So I worked for the Australian Business of Woman of the Year as a kind of PA, I suppose, and housekeeper. And I was cooking, making the Hippocrates diet. And she used to, which was all like wheatgrass and sprouted stuff. So this is quite a long time ago. And she used to have people over for lunch to speak for guests. And she had over a kinesiologist. And I'd never come across kinesiology ever in my life. And it was so interesting, and he used me as a model. So I got very interested in that and started going to a couple of classes that he was teaching. And I also came across, he had an Alexander teacher, and I went and did a course for Alexander technique with dancers while I was in Australia. And I also actually got into Iyengar yoga out there. Somebody took me along, and I started doing Iyengar yoga out there and started assisting in the studio and basically hanging out there nearly all the time. And Iyengar yoga in Australia had a very different flavour. I was quite shocked when I came back to England. So I came back to England, lived in Bristol for a while, wrote for a magazine, carried on with my training and started looking about for therapy trainings. And kinesiology was actually the first training that I did. And it was a 2-year course.
Do you want to say what kinesiology is, just very briefly for those?
Oh, yeah, because in America, kinesiology is usually talked about as the movement of a kind of physical movements. Kinesiologists are kind of movement practitioners, whereas in England, kinesiology is a form of muscle testing. And it came, the course that I did came out of chiropractic, actually. And the system that we did was based on the 5 elements in Chinese medicine. So it was quite meridian based. And you test muscles throughout the body in the system that I do. And since then, it's expanded into many different areas. And you could see it's a bit like dowsing with the body. You're asking the body questions. And sometimes that's rooted in an actual physical muscle test. And sometimes you're just kind of asking the body to say yes or no.
So it might be like, should I eat this food? And then you push on the arm and see what happens.
Yes, well, yes. And what you'd normally do is you'd put the food on the most kinesiologists. I'm rusty on this. I don't practice this anymore. Would put it on the belly button, where the initial source of nutrition is. And then test to see if anything changes. It's a lot more sophisticated than that, but essentially, yes.
Yeah, I'm just trying to give a kind of picture for people.
Yes, and it's often used for basic allergy testing and intolerance. People might do a mini course on that. But it was quite a comprehensive system. So I actually started with that and then just, wanted to learn the anatomy. So I then did an anatomy and physiology course, and then went into the massage and thought I might as well do aromatherapy and reflexology while I was at it. And I had my own practice with that until, after my son was born, actually. I kept that going a bit. Yeah.
And what about the cranio works? I know that's a major thing that you do.
It is. So I don't really practice any of the other stuff now. Cranial work, I love. It's one of my great loves in life, and I'm very grateful to have found it, actually. So when I'm looking at people in yoga, I'm looking to see what their physical patterns are, where blockages are, if I'm teaching physical practice, but also, an emotional practice as well, or a mind practice. We hold things in the body, as you know. And I had cranial work from a homeopath, actually, who I was going to. So I've probably been having cranial work for over 20 years. And from the moment I had it, I knew that I wanted to train in it. But it took me a really long time to save up. And to do my training, you had to have been a therapist for 10 years anyway before you could go and do it. It's probably a bit more flexible these days, as things seem to be generally. So
I'm just going to pause there, because that's actually a fairly significant thing, that it used to be there were much bigger barriers to entry for teaching, like a minimum. I think was it Freud wouldn't teach anyone unless they had a successful career already, and Jung wouldn't teach anyone under 40.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but yes.
But then what you just put your finger on is a general trend across the board to remove barriers of entry. Like therapists don't have to be a certain age anymore, or you don't have to have done, yoga teacher training. You might have done a year of yoga, whereas I don't know what it is for Iyengar, but I'm imagining it's a fairly, serious barrier to entry.
Well, it's usually about, you have to have been a practitioner for about 5 years. I did it for a little bit less because I'd done it so intensely. I'd done hours and hours a day and trained at a studio, was assisting at a studio in Bondi. But I think the teacher training thing, so I've only just started doing teacher training, and I've been teaching for a really long time. And people now will teacher train, when they've been teaching for about 5 years.
Financial pressure, isn't it? It's difficult living in yoga without doing teacher trainings.
Well, I guess so. But I'm actually, so I've explored, I've done I've offered some level 2 teacher trainings this year in a kind of small way. And I think one of the things is that if I did a teacher training, I'm thinking about it at the moment, actually. It's like, how would I do that? And I think it would have to be a 5-year training. To teach the kind of depth that I want to go to, and for people to be able to really take different people in their classes.
And would you accept a student who'd say done yoga for a year?
Probably not. And it depends. It depends. People have different capacity, don't they?
People are always shocked that we interview people for EFC. We spent an hour interviewing people for the Embodied Systemic courses, and they're always really shocked that we turn down about half the people who apply. And it's normally a kind of difficult decision. It's normally they realise it's not quite a good fit, but a lot of that is we're filtering. We're filtering into experience level to kind of for a certain maturity, a certain experience embodiment, to make a really good peer group. And that seems unusual. Like, to me, it just seemed common sense and kind of helpful. And even then, the old person sneaks through who I think, maybe we shouldn't let them on. But at least we make a kind of effort of like a proper filtering process.
Yeah. Well, you run the risk. Some people are not ready, or it's going to be too much for them. Actually, I mean, I see this. It's a general pattern. I see this happening. This is a bit off topic, but in universities, quite often now that people are paying, they will accept almost anybody, and then those people really suffer through the course.
I spoke to a Chinese person yesterday who barely spoke English, and they were doing a course at Sussex University, and I thought, why have they let this person on? It must be money. Like, this person's not going to be getting the most from that education just because their English wasn't up to it. And do you know what I mean? And I'm sure, maybe they would have been better off doing a year of English training first. Do you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, and it's not that I don't think education should be available to all. It's not about that. But I know people that work with people who are at university who are struggling a bit. And one wonders, maybe they'll get through the course, but whether, they'll be left with a debt and not much chance of a job afterwards. So, it's interesting.
So we've deviated a little bit. We're talking about cranio-sacral, which is this. I've got a session lined up tomorrow, actually, which I'm looking forward to in a busy week. There's a very your trainer in Brighton, and we also had Michael Kern on the podcast. It's been
I've listened to that one.
It's a popular episode actually. So I'm putting people to that as to learn a bit more about cranio.
Yes, because it's really difficult to describe it. So I'm glad that one's up there, because I can just direct people to that if they want to know what it is. So I came to cranio-sacral. One, I loved it in my body when I had it done, and two, it was a natural step, literally a step inwards, because you can see these patterns that people kind of moving through or rotating around in the body and in themselves, a kind of samsara, if you like, samsara of the body. And then when you do cranial work and you put your hands on, you can experience that from the inside, and so can the person.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't always work. It doesn't work for everybody. So I think, some time ago you asked me a question like, well, there's not a lot of evidence for this. And I said, the evidence is in my experience. And for some things, that's all there is. And as they're doing more work with fascia, actually, there's a lot of kind of interest and buzz around fascia and interstitial tissue at the moment. They're beginning to find more answers to why this stuff works. Yeah,
I mean, there's definitely something going on with it. And I think because it's quite subtle, the kind of risk in anything subtle of kind of imagination being the bigger picture or whatever. But
sure.
I go to it because I find something of value in it. So I'll say that. And I wonder if there's a movement from the gross to the subtle. Like, we both know Rachel Blackman, who started off acting, and she's been on an episode, then she went to bodywork, and now she's going to Feldenkrais bodywork, which again is subtle kind of bodywork. And equally, I found myself drawn more to sort of subtler martial arts, subtler dances, from the big to the smaller to the more internal seems to be not always, but often the journey in the kind of embodiment career.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's what I see as well. And cranial work, I've just gone back to, I did a little bit of postgraduate training in after I'd qualified as a cranio-sacral. I'm a biodynamic cranio-sacral practitioner. So there were a couple of different flavours of cranial work. And I trained at the Karuna Institute, which is the training's loosely based on Buddhist principle. So we do a lot of training on being able to hold compassionate space for somebody, and understanding what our triggers are and what their triggers might be, and being able to hold that.
Yeah.
So I've lost my thread a minute, actually.
Well, maybe we'll come back to the arts a little bit, because I feel like I want to give a little time to sort of the main threads of your life here, the main threads of your work, and how they all fit together. So we've talked about yoga, we talked about body work. I mean, how the arts, there's people out there who are listening who are into the arts and they're going to immediately get it. But for those who are, yoga teachers or martial artists or dance teachers, how would you say the arts is an embodied thing?
Because it's about self-process. Mm-hmm. Usually, and also about communication. So I think it's a lot of artists, I think, will take in experience, notice how it is for them, and then after a while it will come out, and through the hands or through the eyes or through their mouth or whatever medium they use, to express something.
So if you think of embodiment as the process of self through the body, the definition of embodiment that I'd be quite happy with, actually. There's a process of the self through the body that's going on, and arts really just extend that out of the body into something else. So instead of just being a process that's happening, it's also like, and I'm going to make this music to fully express this, to fully form this. Is that kind of driving at here?
Yeah. That's what I think. And I engage in quite a lot of arts, and I do them for different things. So I go to poetry workshops, usually twice a month. And I just really simply do it as an exercise, as a practice. I'm not a poet. I don't write poetry. But I go to these workshops, and I think of it like fishing. the workshop theme comes up, we're invited, there's usually some readings, we're invited to write, and I drop my line in and see what comes out of the end of my pencil. And I often find that gives me insight. So that's maybe a reverse version of that with writing. But it comes out from within. I draw something out from within.
And do you think there's something missing if we don't have a kind of arts practice? Because this has been one of the, I'm not very musical, I don't sculpt. This has been one of the weaknesses in my own practice. I've gotten into poetry, like I write these little poems and I share those. And I wonder if we don't have an artistic or aesthetic practice in that way, a creative practice or an aesthetic practice, if something isn't a bit missing there, it feels like part of human nature to make art, to create. Not necessarily like art, like a sculpture in a gallery kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it strikes me as it's one of the wings of embodiment. And something for me is lost if we're just doing a form-based practice like Iyengar or, even a bodywork practice. It's like, where's the art in that?
Well, I mean, the art is in human beings are kind of a series of gestures almost, aren't they? We're a series of gestures. And so I think you can make an art of that, like dancers do. Dance, I would say, it's an embodied. It's not always an embodied art, actually, but they've gone a long way into looking at that, particularly with forms like Buto. That's I think quite a key part of it. I don't like to say that I think people are missing something because it just might not be the way that they tick. In terms of the Buddhist practice that I do, we are invited to explore making. So there's always craft. It's seen as an important part, actually, of embodiment. And there's always craft. For me, it adds a depth for me, and I don't know that that's going to be the same for everybody. Yeah, people can make an art of their dress or their home.
Sure, how they dress or how they decorate themselves. Yeah. And by extension, you say, well, teaching's my art, or this is my art. But there's something about there is something about creating, and maybe I disagree with you on this, that I think it is part of the fullness of human experience, even if someone isn't an artist, that's not their lead. Yeah. But I don't think I'm ever going to be seen as an artist. That's not my thing. But it just strikes me as like one of the food groups that I need to nourish myself on, Well, even if it's not actually making. So for years, you probably looked at my CV. I worked at the Tate in St Ives as an artist facilitator. Yeah. And as part of that, we ran tours and then we do a workshop. And the way that I worked with that, which is actually really the way that I work in everything else, is that I would encourage people to trust their response to what was in front of them. Because people often don't trust their response to something. Mm-hmm. And therefore, there's that classic thing. People will say, well, 5-year-old could have done that, about an art. And often it's because they're totally intimidated by what they're looking at. Not always. Sometimes a 5-year-old could have done what's in front of them. Yeah. But it comes usually from fear, I think, of not saying the right thing about something. So my way of working with people in that way was to get them to engage through the sense feels. So if you could taste this, what would it taste like? If you could smell it, that sort of thing. Yeah. And, I did a lot of stuff with language, like how does this word fit with this? And what does that feel like? So in order to give people some kind of way of engaging with what was there, because art has this amazing capacity, the arts has this amazing capacity to transport us or to take us to somewhere new that we hadn't thought about before. Yeah. I live in Brighton, which is a very kind of artistic town. There's lots of artists here. There's galleries. There's festival. It's just wrapping up, the Brighton Festival at the moment. And
the Fringe. Yeah, I was just there too.
Of course, I saw you in the street, didn't I? I was like, Amanda, I'm interviewing you in 3 days. I thought you were in Cornwall. Anyway, but I love the vibrancy that it brings. There's something about places that have a lot of art that brings there's cliches around this, but I think those cliches come from somewhere. The flamboyant artist, or in Brighton, it's a sort of gay community that buys art and that loves art. And the student artists, but there's a vibrant, and Brighton's always been an artistic town because it was kind of founded as a kind of musical drug den for the Prince region. And
yes,
it lived its history as one of kind of crazy artists by the sea. That's how it was built. But that does lead to a certain embodied flavour in a town that I don't find in, say, Peterborough when I'm there visiting my sister on Saturday. Like a town that doesn't have quite the same level of artistic kind of work going on. And Cornwall's always had that, hasn't it? These little galleries and little artists that are kind of there. The same in Devon. And it
definitely
does change the embodiment of a place, whether it be urban or rural.
It does. And I think, one of the reasons that, I find I struggle to talk about this a little bit because it's completely in my background. My father was a painter and my mother worked at the Leach Pottery. And so I was continually just surrounded by artists and poets and makers. So it was just totally part of what one did.
To be around those people, like rich people will pay to be around those people because it is something in those people, even if they're drug addict or killing themselves, or there's the cliches of the sort of tortured artists, but in the non-tortured ones too, there's plenty of non-tortured ones. People want to be around those people because there's a life to it. And what is embodiment if it's not life?
Exactly. Also, actually, what's just come to mind is, so artists, well, as yoga practitioners and psychoanalysts, all of those, we're all kind of, can be a fairly neurotic bunch trying to work something out. And maybe what makes a difference is that artists are sometimes able to put that neurosis on the table.
Yes.
And other people can see that it's out on the table. And that kind of makes it okay, or it enables them to look at it from a different perspective, to actually get it out there. I think that's one aspect.
It's not a nebulous feeling inside. It's concretized. Like,
yes.
I saw some stand-up comedy last Saturday, and I went to this comedy club, and all the comedians were saying something that was on the tip of everyone else's tongue. They were articulating a thing that needed to be said or was about to be said in a way that, because it was funny, it kind of lubricated the journey out from the nebulous. Does that make sense?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. And artists have this, they can do this. But that thing about kind of needing really rich patrons was the main reason that I stopped when I left college. I couldn't stand it. I'm too chippy.
Chippy being like attitude.
Yeah, log on my shoulder about being working class.
We haven't talked about class much, but I know like both me and you are a little bit rougher around the edges than some people in the yoga world.
Speak for yourself.
And fuck off. You are too, darling.
Yeah.
And certainly in the arts world, I mean, we're having this fairly highbrow arts would you not say that the concretization, Amanda, of the nebulous feelings of, we're having this slightly wanky conversation about the arts, but the class embodiment, I want to talk to you, maybe one of the last subjects, is something that's in Britain in a big way that like no one talks about. I've never heard a yoga teacher in a class talk about class embodiment. I have heard them talk about ethnicity and sexuality and stuff. Those things are getting a little bit more, up to the surface now. But class is like one of those, the Americans don't talk about it. They pretend class doesn't exist.
Yeah.
But it does. And it's
totally.
Us, right?
Yeah. Yes. Sorry, did you say it's
part of us. It's part of our embodiment.
Yes.
I'd love to get your take on this as a sort of, I've always sort of found you quite, what would be the word, like normal, like, even though you're talking about cranio-sacral therapy and arts, there's a sort of realness to you, which I think could speak to this.
Yeah, I think, there's a realness to me partly because I've had my foot in both camps. I went to lots and lots of different schools when I was young. There was a little conversation about ADHD that was there on Facebook earlier. And I think probably that I was restless. I was bright and restless, so I got away with it. But I ended up going to a range of different, I got scholarships to some schools and then ended up in a really rough comprehensive and went to grammar school. I did a range of education, which means that overall I see that people have the same problems wherever they are. And actually being a therapist always shows you that. In fact, that helped me get rid of my big chip about being working class, is that I have people coming to me who who I wouldn't necessarily have chosen to spend time with because they were posh.
Yeah.
But actually, they have the most appalling lives.
Yeah, I'm sure you can be miserable with any bank balance, and
exactly. Yeah.
Bank balance. But, I mean, artists traditionally have mixed with different sections of society as well, right? Like that's one.
Absolutely. Yeah. Although I think the artists that are often, I'm generalizing here, there are people that make it that don't come from a wealthy background, but just if I think about the people who I was at college with, a couple of whom have become really quite well known, they had financial advantage, like they had a flat in London.
Same with yoga teachers whose husbands are supporting them, or come from a business marketing background. I see that with yoga teachers as well.
Yeah, they have advantages, and they're usually financial, not always, but usually.
Yeah.
And
talk about privilege and sense of class, isn't it? Because it's not necessarily ethnically based, or there's I think it's the one that Americans are really missing in all these privilege conversations is the one about class, which is so huge in the UK.
Well, and I mean, and that is related to race and religion as well. I mean, that's a big question. I mean, in Cornwall, I don't get to have that dialogue much. It's not very. It's mainly white people.
Yeah. Well, Brighton's pretty well with Spanish and French and Polish and a few other minorities that aren't immediately obvious, but. Yeah, and I guess, like, for example, they talk about man spreading as a sort of somatic sign of privilege. Well, like, equally, I posh spreading is one I definitely see that I don't hear named.
Yes. Well, it's the confidence.
Yeah, the confidence. And like my mate Peter, who went to Eton, like God love him, he was instilled with the confidence of a future leader of the country. And I don't want to take that away from him because it's a beautiful thing to see. It just isn't given to the kids at the comprehensive around the corner.
Yeah, well, and it comes from like being really young as well. So I used to do a lot of art workshops and pottery workshops in museums and things when I was younger. So I had lots of different schools coming through. And I think back then, the kind of straightforward village schools, they'd let the kids fail. Yeah. And this is really important. They'd let them, if the thing that they made wasn't very good, they'd get praise for the thing that they made that wasn't very good.
Yeah.
So that there was no kind of like covering it up. It was what it was. Everybody knows who's good at something and who isn't in the class. Mm-hmm. So, there's no point kind of trying to pretend that they're not. But the kids that came from the private schools or the public schools, the teachers wouldn't let them fail. Mm-hmm. They'd rush around kind of making good the thing that they hadn't made very well. Yeah. And whilst that seems like a really simple thing, I think it's significant.
It's what we do with the banks. it's too posh to fail. But
it gives a sense of entitlement, and that whoever is around you will mop up your failure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think I saw it back then.
Yeah, I mean, I've also worked with the full spectrum of schools, and I'd see the better teaching that was going on in the vast majority of fee-paying schools compared to state schools. The smaller classes, the attention, some really positive things in those fee-paying schools. And I just thought, wow, that's such an unfair advantage. Of course, the kids are doing better in exams.
Yes, and the teachers that are in the state schools would also be teaching. Such a good teachers as well. They've just not got the same resources.
Yeah, well, there's partly
shout out for all the teachers out there that might be listening.
Well, yes and no. It's also an economy, so you can get paid twice as much elsewhere. Then there's going to be a certain selection there. Though I've seen very good state teachers before I get mobs of teachers outside my door. Listen, so we need to wrap up. So we've covered bodywork, yoga, arts, class. We're pretty wide ranging. I'm not sure what to call this episode at all because we've covered so much. Maybe something about integration. Do you have first two things to finish. One, where can people find you other than Falmouth?
I have a website which is www.groundofbeing.co.uk, which I update not as often as I should, but you can contact me through there, and sometimes I even post things that I'm doing. I've got a Facebook page, which is Biodynamic Yoga. And I've also got a Facebook page called Heddle and Slub, because I have a project called the 13 Looms Project, which is taking weaving into places. It's a portable weaving studio. And I've started to look at how we combine a kind of tacit sense of embodiment through the fingers with the physical embodiment of yoga. So I'm basically running yoga and weaving retreats.
It's called 13 Looms. I'm just trying to find this. This is a website or a Facebook page?
No, you won't find it on a website. I've got a Facebook page called Heddle and Slub.
Heddle?
Heddle.
Heddle?
Yes.
And Slug?
Slub. SLUB.
Don't make this easy, but I'm gonna get these links for. There we go.
And it's Heddle and Slub. It started off as a kind of joke because of all of these names like Hatchet and Bear and Willow and Stone, and I thought Heddle and Slub sounded quite funny, but it's kind of stuck.
Got it. And a final closing message about the body for all our listeners from Falmouth to the world. What do you have to say, Amanda?
Just keep being curious about what's happening, and be a practitioner. Do what you do with diligence and energy and enjoyment.
Amanda, thanks so much. This just felt really easeful, which I needed today because I'm having a very long day. And sometimes it's hard work with the guests, much as I love them, whereas this has just felt very easeful. So I appreciate that. It's nice to hang out with you.
If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to get more. If you'd like to help us build the Embodied Tribe, leave a review on iTunes or share this on your social media. If you're interested in training globally, sign up to receive the newsletter at embodiedfacilitator.com. Until next time, welcome home to the body.